see that my window is transmitting. Yeah, let's try it, okay? I see the stories, and connecting and transmitting. We should be transmitting now. Audio is on channel 2. Beautiful. Thanks, Dan. The presser starts at 8 a.m. Thanks for your help, Dan. You should see me now.
Quite a few years ago, and corporate had told us, here's what happened in Miami. Nobody knew, nobody's trucks were working. Nobody knew how the trucks were working. All the way reporters and the interest rate working. Well, that part was fine. All that was still in place. And all of it was still in place. What's the trucks? You know, some of our trucks were always sitting on the same cabs they were in 3 years ago. There we go. That'll be our next expense. Get this started. But I mean, once we did that, we were trying to talk. Okay, well, next year we're going to get urgent. I don't want to. I want to use the cargo van with all the equipment that I can carry extra. And the fact that that truck is now being assisted to us for money. We were prompter at the feed. We want 2 or 3 cameras going out and switching stuff. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't realize another thing of the stadiums and games all have close to virgin profile.
Hey, John.
Yes.
We do another audio.
Sure. Sound check testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everybody ready on the left? Ready on the right?
Yes.
Everyone is good.
Afraid to repeat those same lies under oath. I guess time will tell. As the representative of Minnesota's 6th Congressional District, I have witnessed firsthand the consequences that come when our Democrat state leaders prioritize criminal illegal aliens over law-abiding Minnesotans. The unrest that we all watched unfold in Minneapolis over recent weeks was unnerving. It was heartbreaking, and any loss of life is tragic. But make no mistake, it was all a direct result of radical sanctuary state and city policies in Minnesota. By preventing local law enforcement from working together with federal law enforcement, they have turned Minnesota into a safe haven for criminal illegal aliens. We're talking about murderers, rapists, gang members, and child predators. Now, before you hear dizzying spin from one of the other witnesses here today, let's take a closer look at how we got here. In 2021, with Attorney General Keith Ellison as the chief law enforcement officer in our state, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office issued a directive which prohibited the county's cooperation with immigration and customs enforcement. 4 years later, Ellison issued 2 legal opinions arguing that Minnesota law prohibits state and local law enforcement agencies from holding someone based on an immigration detainer if the person would otherwise be released from custody, and limiting county sheriff's ability to enter into 287G cooperation agreements with federal law enforcement. What happened as a result? Criminal illegal aliens were released back onto our streets, putting innocent Minnesotans' lives at risk. Take the case of Victoria Aline Harwell, for example, a Minnesota mom who was allegedly killed by an illegal alien in a drunk driving car crash. Hennepin County ignored detainer requests and let this criminal walk not once, but twice, citing Attorney General Ellison's opinion. Flash forward to December 2025, when the Trump administration launched Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis, fulfilling the border security mandate they were given by 77 million Americans and following the uncovering of rampant Somali fraud throughout our state. As of last week, 4,000 illegal aliens have been arrested since Operation Metro Surge began. That includes the worst of the worst off our streets. But in response, Tim Walz and Keith Ellison sued the Department of Homeland Security for simply deploying federal law enforcement to enforce federal law. That lawsuit was ultimately rejected by a Biden-appointed federal judge, and now Trump border czar Tom Homan has been working with Minnesota officials to scale back Operation Metro Surge on the condition that local law enforcement be allowed to cooperate with federal law enforcement, something, by the way, that occurred under the President Obama's administration. It's important to note that it didn't have to be this way. The chaos in Minneapolis was entirely preventable had the local law enforcement been allowed to work with federal law enforcement from the beginning. We see that in states like Texas, Florida, Utah. We also see that in 8 Minnesota counties, including Sherburne County, which is in my district. Sherburne and these 7 counties have proactively partnered with federal law enforcement to prevent criminal illegal aliens from roaming free, despite threats of ridiculous lawsuits by the ACLU arising from Attorney General Ellison's dangerous guidance. It's really that simple. By allowing local law enforcement to notify federal law enforcement when they arrest illegal aliens and detain them until a federal officer can come and get them, we limit the Fed's footprint and keep dangerous criminals off our streets. It's a win-win for all parties involved. But Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, and Jacob Fry are so beholden to their radical sanctuary state and city agenda that they've lost all common sense. And now here we are today with innocent lives lost and chaos in our streets. It's horrible, but entirely preventable. And it makes you wonder, why are Minnesota Democrats so keen on protecting criminal illegal aliens? Is it so that they can secure votes come election season? Tim Walz, after all, refuses to hand over Minnesota's voter rolls to the Department of Justice. And Keith Ellison has a history of cutting deals with Somali fraudsters for personal, political, and financial gain. These are all very important questions, and I hope we can get some clarification on all of them today. Minnesotans deserve answers and accountability. Thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of all the hardworking, law-abiding Minnesotans. We're grateful for your commitment to uncovering the truth and ensuring that justice be served. I yield back.
Congressman Emmer, thank you for your statement and for your participation today. It's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. Will each of the remaining witnesses rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Our first witness will be Harry Niska, who represents District 31A in the Minnesota House of Representatives and serves as the Republican floor leader. Representative Niska, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of this committee. My name is Harry Niska. I serve in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Thank you for the opportunity to present a perspective from Minnesota's immigration enforcement crisis. I want to start by expressing my appreciation for the recent recalibration of federal enforcement under Tom Homan. His commitment to rebuilding accountability and trust is essential, and we're already seeing a more focused and disciplined federal effort on the ground. But federal action only tells part of the story. Minnesota had been proud of our reputation for clean and good government, but recently we've become a cautionary tale of chaos, corruption, and fraud. And this decline is the result of specific policy choices made by Minnesota Democrats, especially related to immigration policy. First, they rolled out a welcome mat of benefits that erased the distinction between legal and illegal presence. In 2023, specifically under all Democrat control, Minnesota passed driver's licenses for all, explicitly including those without legal status, and even refused to include common sense measures like a label saying not eligible for voting. Minnesota created the North Star Promise, which provides free college tuition, including to illegal immigrants, and Minnesota extended taxpayer-funded health care and paid leave benefits to those here illegally. But beyond incentives, we face a graver issue in Minnesota: active nullification of federal law. Our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, issued an opinion blocking the use of 287G agreements, the gold standard for federal-state law enforcement cooperation. And in another opinion, he provided legal cover for sheriffs who want to ignore ICE detainers. The results are stark. In some counties, ICE detainers are complied with, but in Hennepin County, our largest jurisdiction featuring Minneapolis, the sheriff's office complied with only 8% of ICE detainer requests over a 2-year period. This obstruction has a cost. When jails refuse to honor detainers, they don't stop enforcement, they displace it. Arresting a suspect in the secure environment of a jail is safe and efficient. Forcing that arrest happen in a home or a workplace, or what we saw just this week in the lobby of the Hennepin County Courthouse, drastically increases the risk to officers and the public. When Minnesota local law enforcement officials, the Hennepin County attorney, thinks it's better to release someone caught with 50 pounds of meth in January and release them out into the community, and ICE has to arrest them in the lobby of the Hennepin County Courthouse, which is what happened yesterday. That is what causes the chaos that we've seen in Minneapolis. And the Minneapolis Police Department has refused to assist even in crowd control during these types of chaotic situations. That's what resulted in the 2 tragic deaths that we heard about earlier today. And we will never know, sadly, how those 2 situations had turned out if Minneapolis police had been permitted by their political leaders, like Governor Walz, Attorney General Ellison, and Mayor Frey, to simply keep the peace, rather than forcing federal law enforcement officials into a chaotic situation. The rule of law must include enforcing federal immigration law. It must be done within the bounds of the law. But simply withdrawing federal enforcement at a heckler's veto because of those who are opposed to enforcing the law would only validate nullification and encourage further lawlessness. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Keith Ellison is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. Attorney General Ellison, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Paul, and thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, Chairman Paul, and thank you, Ranking Member Peters, and thank you to all members of the committee. I'm Keith Ellison, and I'm the Minnesota Attorney General. Since early December, Minnesota has been the site of Operation Metro Surge, the largest single deployment of ICE agents in the history of the United States, the largest single immigration enforcement surge our country has ever seen. The surge has caused real harm to our state. Members of the committee, I respectfully ask you to exercise your oversight powers to do the following things. One, require ICE to provide a full, transparent accounting of everyone stopped, detained, arrested, and deported from Minnesota during Operation Metro Surge. Two, require ICE to document the conditions of its detention facilities and to allow attorneys, healthcare professionals, clergy, and elected officials full access. Three, require the FBI to conduct investigations in partnership with Minnesota into the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and into every other use of excessive force. Four, require ICE to stop masking, stop the racial profiling, stop conducting warrantless searches. And finally, pass comprehensive immigration reform. I was so encouraged years ago when Senator Langford was leading that effort. It needs to be renewed. One question any rational person might ask is why? Why is this happening? Because it simply doesn't really make sense. Every rationale the administration has offered for this surge is really a pretext. The government has said the purpose of the surge is to fight unauthorized immigration, yet Minnesota ranks 28th among all states in the percentage of undocumented immigrants. Florida and Texas alone have nearly as many undocumented people as the entire population of the state of Minnesota. The government has said the purpose of the surge is to fight fraud in government programs. Well, of course, I hate fraud, and my office and I are already fighting it. We've convicted 300 people of Medicaid fraudsters in the last 7 years. The government did not surge, however, forensic accountants to Minnesota. They didn't surge computer experts. Instead, they sent 3,000 masked, armed men who are now kicking in doors, demanding papers, killing Minnesotans, not fighting fraud. The surge has hurt the fight against fraud. Because of it, a wave of experienced prosecutors have left the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, and the remaining staff are now drowning in a flood of habeas corpus petitions. The government has also said that the purpose of the surge was to fight violent crime and rid our streets of the worst of the worst. And yet violent crime rates in Minneapolis were falling before the surge. Furthermore, ICE's own data shows that 77% of those it has detained in Minnesota have no criminal record at all. Notoriously, some of those detained have been children. Is 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos the worst of the worst, or 10-year-old Elizabeth Zunia Castaguano? The surge is contributing to violent crime, members. It's contributing to violent crime. 2 of the 3 homicides committed in Minneapolis in 2026 have come at the hands of federal immigration agents. Recently, the government has said the purpose of the surge is to gain cooperation from state and local officials and immigration enforcement, but the Minnesota Department of Corrections already follows state law that requires Minnesota to notify federal authorities when a non-citizen incarcerated for a felony. Second, under Minnesota law, no jail can keep someone incarcerated on an ICE detainer longer than they're otherwise legally allowed to incarcerate them. This is not unique to Minnesota. Several of our federal and state courts have reached a broad consensus that aligns with our law. So after dismissing all of the pretexts, what's clear, this surge is all about what Donald Trump said it was all about. In a true social post on January 13th, he wrote, "Retribution and reckoning was coming to Minnesota." This war on Minnesota is retribution, to be sure. Our policies, our values, and how we vote, and it comes at a great cost. Senators, it comes at a cost of the lives of 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. It comes at the cost of shuttered businesses, Mr. Chairman, disruptions in education for tens of thousands of children, lasting harm to Minnesota's economic prosperity and social cohesion. And it comes at a cost, Mr. Chairman, to our Constitution. Under the 10th Amendment, the federal government may not compel or coerce states to enforce immigration laws
or any other federal government priorities. And under the First Amendment, the government may not stifle speech or restrict the right of peaceful assembly. Operation Metro Surge routinely violates both these constitutional principles. So, Mr. Chairman, you'll never know how grateful I am that you called this hearing to discuss this matter. Mr. Ranking Member, I do appreciate it very much. The people of Minnesota care deeply about the health, safety, and constitutional right of their neighbors. And I have one final request of all senators, and that is directed to the administration. End the surge. End it now. It's already gone too far, and it must go no further. I yield back.
Paul Schnell serves as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Commissioner Schnell, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Paul Schnell, and I serve as Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. I appear before you as a career public safety professional, a former law enforcement officer, police chief, and now head of the State Corrections Agency. What is happening in Minnesota is not a dispute about whether immigration laws should be enforced. What is in question are the reasons for the unprecedented federal actions in our state and the tactics being used. 2 Minnesotans, both U.S. citizens, are dead following encounters with federal immigration agents. That alone warrants serious oversight, particularly in light of federal officials' unwillingness to allow a shared investigative process. Oversight must begin by separating fact from fiction. Our agency has worked hard to bring facts to light. Accuracy is not defiance. The latest false narrative is that Minnesota is a lawless sanctuary where dangerous criminals are allowed to slip through the cracks. That simply is not true. My written testimony is extensive, but I'd like to highlight 3 points. First, Minnesota honors immigration detainers and has coordinated with federal authorities for many years. Any suggestion that we refuse to cooperate or harbor non-citizens is baseless. Second, President Trump's request that serious offenders be deported before they serve their court-imposed sentences undermine both victim and state justice interests. Third, the execution of Operation Metro Surge has had tragic consequences. What has resulted is not controlled, target-focused enforcement, but an operation lacking planning, discipline, and constitutional restraint. It is both possible to respect civil liberties and engage in meaningful immigration enforcement. We as a country need DHS to respect that balance. Minnesota's experience shows us that unchecked enforcement can lead to tragedy and a profound loss of trust. Constitutional rights are not partisan issues. Government power must be checked and balanced, and law enforcement must operate within the law. Chairman Paul, members of the committee, I am here because I believe oversight is urgently needed. Minnesota seeks a return to law enforcement agencies respecting each other's roles, where enforcement is proportional and constitutional, and where the public can trust that government power is exercised responsibly and transparently. We are not there today, but with your help and continued advocacy from leaders who value the constitutional principles, I am hopeful we can get there again. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me. I am prepared to answer your questions and assist the committee's inquiry in any way I can.
Thank you all for your testimony. I think there is a way we can get beyond, our differences on immigration and our differences on approach. And I think, but we have to look at this in a broad scope and try to leave some of that aside. I think there is no justification for bad behavior from law enforcement, whether it's your local police or others. It has to be investigated, needs to be corrected. You have to change your policies. You have to announce that you're going to do a better job. But I think there is an explanation for why there's 3,000 ICE agents in Minnesota. One explanation has been put forward was vindictive. Maybe, I don't know for sure. But I do know that if you tell people preemptively that your local police will not cooperate, so if ICE calls you up and says to Minneapolis, we have a guy, we're just presuming it's a guy because more bad people out there, unfortunately, are men than women. It's a guy, this bad guy, we want to pick him up. He's been convicted of an assault and he's now needs to be deported. If the policy of Minneapolis is not to cooperate at all, I mean, there's going to be a real problem, and then they're going to say we need more ICE agents. So what happens right now, Mr. Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, if I'm from ICE and I call Minneapolis and I say, John Smith is wanted, and will you help us? Could we have 10 Minneapolis policemen go with 1 or 2 agents and arrest him? Or do we have to have 12 agents and no Minneapolis police? What happens?
Well, under Minnesota statute 631.50, anybody convicted of a felony who's in custody must be questioned about their nationality.
That's in custody. That's sort of a different question.
Okay.
I'm talking about somebody who's in
Right.
the community and they need help arresting this person.
Right, but you said felony, so
You're right.
that's what
And
maybe.
that's a different, we'll talk about
Okay,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
let's talk about somebody they want help, and is the local police force going to give them help, or do they have to bring in all ICE agents to do it?
Certainly, targeted enforcement is not the problem, as has been said.
But I think that's what has been said of some of your policies, and the interpretation is that they don't have to and won't cooperate with ICE.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, they're not my policies, just so all the members of the committee know. When you see advice or an advisory opinion coming from the Attorney General's office, this is not my opinion. It is the lawyers in my offices at my best analysis of what the law requires. So I say that to you because even if I didn't issue an opinion, the law would still be what it was.
But a month ago, if ICE called the local Minneapolis police and said, we want to arrest this person, will the Minneapolis police help ICE to arrest a person?
I think so, yes.
Well, and this gets to now we're at a question of facts. 'Cause
But see, Mr.
I
Chairman,
think most people are arguing that that's not true and that that's a reason for the surge. If it is true, then the local officials need to say they will. But I mean, the mayor of Minneapolis said used crude language to tell them where to go. He didn't say, oh, we're not going to help you arrest 5-year-old boys because we think that's wrong. But if you have a rapist, we'll help you elect rapists, assault people, thieves, drug kingpins, et cetera. But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening to me. I mean, do you really think that it is happening? They're cooperating?
Yes, I do, Senator.
All right.
And let me just, if you'd allow me just to elaborate, I think that what we're dealing with is a difference of what the scenario is. If you're talking about a person who's been convicted of a crime where in targeted enforcement, you will see Minnesota officials make sure that that person is addressed properly and deals with their consequences when it comes to immigration.
So Representative Niska, do you think the local police are cooperating if ICE calls them?
No, the public statements of Minneapolis officials have been that Minneapolis police will not assist in enforcing immigration. Perhaps they'll assist if there's some state crime that's alleged, but if ICE were to call in your scenario and say, we need to pick somebody up for violating immigration law, the Minneapolis public statements have been that they won't. And the example we saw just this last week of someone who was arrested with 50 pounds, an illegal immigrant arrested with 50 pounds of meth on January 8th was allowed to go free and had to be taken by ICE last week.
Thank you. Mr. Schnell, I would like to know, and I've watched some of your interviews, I am impressed with the idea that ICE was saying there was 1,300 people. You reviewed them. Some of these people aren't in Minnesota, never were in Minnesota. Some of them have been released to ICE themselves, and their list is just flat out wrong. The most impressive thing I heard in one of your interviews was that somebody named Lou Mua was a person that they were, saying, this is why we have to break down doors because this terrible person. Sounds like he probably is a terrible person, but you said he was in jail already, and he had a detainer. So I think that truth needs to be explored if that is really happening. There used to be, people said, a direct portal, though. So when you did it or somebody got booked, it went directly to ICE. Does that still exist, or do you have to do them one at a time in prison?
So, Mr. Chair, at present, we provide notification in accordance with law to ICE when they come in. There are systems that are available to people to be able to get that, for ICE to be able to get that
I was told that
information.
Mayorkas stopped the portal, and the portal was a very fast portal, where it was sort of automatically done. True or not true?
It is true that there is a portal that ICE can access.
It was stopped under Mayorkas.
I believe so.
Okay, but you still do your job, you do your detainers in. And so one of the questions goes back to Attorney General Morris's point. So, and look, I'm a stickler for the law, I'm a libertarian on these issues. If detaining somebody who's already served their sentence doesn't make sense to me. But here's my question, if someone is in your prison for 5 years, which some of them are gonna be in prison 5 years, they're also wanted and they're at a detainer, which means they haven't had their judgment. Why couldn't we go to immigration court during the 5 years in prison? Does that happen, and why doesn't it happen?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there are some rare instances where we have had people who have had immigration proceedings while they've been in custody and, where removal
That would answer
determinations
some of
were
the
made.
questions. Then you have a final court judgment. You go through a court, he's going to be represented, and we're going to go through the final judgment. And then Attorney General's problem that, they've not, a detainer's a request, not a conviction, then they would have had their conviction, it's much easier. But they also, if it's seamlessly working, is it most of the time when you notify ICE, are they showing up on the day they're going to release and it's a peaceful turnover? Or are they doing it half the time, 20% of the time, 100% of the time? How's it working?
Mr. Chairman, I think there has been wide-scale cooperation for a long time. We have had, excellent experiences, and the local staff of the Department of Corrections and the local ICE office are very effective.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Schnell, has ICE or anyone else at DHS attempted to coordinate their operations with state and local law enforcement, or even notified them when they are conducting immigration enforcement, according to your knowledge?
Senator, I believe this is one of the challenges, and may speak a little bit to the chairman's earlier question, that there has not been a planful approach. There has not been efforts to coordinate or discuss their targets. We have not been provided with a list of targets, as a for instance, where there could be some opportunities where we have those dangerous people that represent a risk to Minnesota's public safety that we could coordinate. So that has not happened.
So it hasn't. They have not been attempting to coordinate with local law enforcement, what you've seen. And you have your current experience. You also have a long and distinguished career as in police in the community, including a police chief for a number of communities. So they have not coordinated, to your knowledge. So what danger to public safety and local law enforcement does this lack of coordination from DHS result in?
Well, I think, Senator, what we see is a situation that is crisis-driven. And I think the challenges are when things get out of hand, then it was we need local law enforcement to protect ICE and ICE operations. When in fact, if coordination had happened from the get-go, I think a lot of this could have been avoided. And there's a long history, whether it's Minneapolis Police, the Department of Corrections, any law enforcement in Minnesota, of strong collaboration with federal partners. For instance, the Department of Homeland Security Investigations Division does a lot of work with transnational drug investigations on task forces that law enforcement are actively involved in. And these are really positive and important public safety ventures. And yet, this particular intrusion into the state really was done solely by them without coordination, and that has created, I think, a public safety mess for our state, and something that I think we should all be concerned about.
Well, that's significant. So they are not reaching out to try to coordinate an action. It sounds like from your testimony, if I'm correct, it's only when it gets a crisis situation because it's out of control, that they had lost control, then they call for help from the police. Please help us. We're messing this operation up.
I think, Senator, that's precisely, I think, what we have seen over the course of time is that as things became more crisis-oriented after the two shootings, the two deaths, then there was this need for collaboration and securing ICE agents and even the local ICE facility in Minneapolis.
Okay. So lack of attempt to even coordinate at the front end is a significant problem, and I hear you. Attorney General Ellison, I'm going to ask you another related question to that coordination. Can you describe the coordination between DHS or DOJ with the state and local officials into the investigations of the tragic shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy?
We haven't had any Senator, we haven't had any cooperation up until now, which is really unusual because in prior cases where there's been a federal and state interest in a crime, we've seen collaboration between federal and state authorities. It's how we normally do work. It's not unusual at all. And in fact, this situation, when we were told you can't have access to the evidence, to the crime scene, that was highly unusual and surprising to us. And so we're hoping that we can gain cooperation, perhaps in the Preddy matter, but we've been advised that the Good matter is the feds are not investigating it, and we still haven't received any access to the evidence that is involved in that case. So it's an unusual, strange situation, but we're with good faith, hoping that things will change.
So that's important. You're saying in the past they've worked with you or other folks.
Yeah.
But in these two cases, they're stonewalling you?
That's a yes. That's a yes.
Wow. Well, Commissioner Schnell, as a former local police chief, as I mentioned earlier, is cutting out law enforcement, cutting out local law enforcement a common and effective way to actually conduct an investigation?
Senator, no. I think, the operations, as the Attorney General pointed out, of close collaboration and sharing of evidence. And we saw that in rather significant cases where there was both a local investigation and prosecution, as well as a federal investigation and prosecution in other cases. So, I think as we look at the public safety of Minnesota, the public safety of our country, collaboration between law enforcement and focused and targeted enforcement on issues of critical importance, whether that's human trafficking or large-scale drug interdictions, these things need to continue, and we need to get back on track for those matters. And I think that's where success can happen. That's where success has happened in collaboration, but that's not what's happening currently as we see in Minneapolis and Minnesota.
Okay. So the next question is to both of you. This administration has basically demanded that Minnesota state and local agencies use their extremely limited resources to basically subsidize DHS operations, is what we're hearing. Now, this is despite DHS receiving well over $100 billion from the Republican spending bill to conduct the kinds of operations we're seeing on these streets. So given recent reporting that only 14% of arrests made by DHS are individuals with a criminal record, would you say this is a good use of those limited state resources that you have to protect people on the streets of your local communities, to help ICE round up mothers on their way to work or children getting off the school bus, or should you be using that to fight crime on your streets and making the people safe in your communities? And how does that strain your ability to provide public safety for the residents that you serve? Attorney General Ellison, you want to take the first stab?
Yeah, well, Senator, look, crime in Minnesota and in Minneapolis has been going down. We're grateful for that, but we still need every resource we can to protect public safety. And the fact is, resources are very limited. I think that given the proper circumstances, legal cooperation makes sense, but we simply don't have the state budget to be deputized to carry out functions that are reserved constitutionally to the federal government. That's their business. We have our business, and where we can work together, that's a good idea, but we simply cannot just convert our resources over to the federal government.
So.
Senator, I simply can't imagine how many dollars have been spent in Operation Metro Surge. It's staggering. The cost of human life, as well as just the actual financial resources, is hard to even imagine, especially when we look at the numbers that we're talking about. When we look at what is happening operationally, it becomes hard to understand, and certainly taking resources away from the local community would be contrary to public safety in our state. And I think it's also important to say that, we didn't ask for this level of assistance. I think we have seen crime go down in our state, and this certainly has not been ultimately beneficial to the safety of our state.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson.
So a lot of what we heard here today literally makes no sense. When you look at the history of returns and removals, the Obama administration, first Trump administration, you have to kind of throw out Biden. It was such an aberration. Obama, on average, they returned and removed about 650,000 people a year. Trump in his first term, about 500,000. It's lower than Obama. This first year, there have been a little under 600,000 returns and removals. That's a lot, but it's not a whole lot when you realize we flooded who knows how many, at least probably 10 million people, if not more, during the Biden administration, and created this enormous mess. By the way, including that, according to DHS, 650,000 criminals that are at large. They're not detained. 15,000 murderers. 20,000 people convicted of sexual assault. I mean, that's the mess that the Democrat and President Biden's open border policy created that the Trump administration is trying to clean up. But they've deported close to 600,000 people under this administration, and in most states and most cities, there aren't protests. There aren't protesters being shot. Obviously, problems in Los Angeles, probably Portland. These places that claim to be sanctuary cities that sounds like, Attorney General Ellison is denying the fact that, we cooperate with ICE. I think Representative Niska wouldn't agree with that. So again, I'm trying to square this circle going, this doesn't make sense to me. I wish we had the government officials here, the DHS officials, our next panel on this one, just to refute this, to rebut it. We had a very interesting hearing last week on the fraud in Minnesota, and we had State Senator Mark Cron. And in his testimony, he was talking about local reports of something like 30,000, they call them observers, being trained. Okay, I thought that was an incredible figure. I'm not saying there actually were, but it certainly sounds that there are activists being trained. Are you aware of training for activists, Mr. Ellison, in Minnesota? That some of these protesters literally went through training. There are groups out there providing training. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I mean, it's common for people to use their First Amendment right to protest things that they don't believe are right.
Were you aware of the
First Amendment activity, sir?
Yeah. Were you aware of the signal chats? I believe it was the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota was actually helping manage one of those signal chats that were deploying those trained activists to the legal law enforcement actions. Or were you aware of that signal chat that was being used to deploy those people?
I'm aware it exists, but this is First Amendment activity, sir. Okay, this is something that the law.
Did you ever encourage people to go out there and exercise their First Amendment?
Yeah, I do.
Right?
I freely admit being in favor of the First Amendment.
You encourage trained activists to put themselves into harm's way because you had to know, because you were watching this, that there were scuffles at least, that these people were obstructing justice. I would think you'd actually, as the chief law enforcement officer of Minnesota, be concerned about people obstructing justice. So, putting their cars in streets, blocking roads. I would think as chief law enforcement, you would be concerned about that, but were you ever concerned about encouraging I guess people that support you, to go out and put themselves into harm's way
No,
by
we never,
impeding and obstructing illegal law enforcement action. Did that ever concern you?
sir, that never happened. We all times said, if you want to protest, protest peacefully, protest safely, but you'll never find me being against the First
That's a good
Amendment.
out right now, but
I'll always be for the First Amendment.
But you were seeing the scuffles, right? You were seeing and by the way, Minneapolis police officials could not help protect ICE officials, right? I mean, Representative Niska, isn't that, when you're talking about the nullification of federal law, isn't that one of the, Hennepin County, that they simply could not help and protect ICE in their legal law enforcement actions?
The Minneapolis Police Department issued guidance in July saying that they would not even help with crowd control around immigration operations. And Minnesota leaders encouraged that kind of action. The Minnesota Lieutenant Governor encouraged people to put their bodies on the line.
I can't imagine encouraging somebody that supported me politically to go and put themselves into harm's way. I can't imagine that, particularly when you know that these law enforcement officials had been shot at, a couple of illegal immigrants inadvertently killed because people were shooting at ICE officers. Their vehicles have been rammed by some of these peaceful protesters, probably the trained activists. They've had rocks thrown at their vehicles. I can't imagine encouraging people, put yourselves in harm's way. Get out there and record that. I, as a government official, would have said, back off. Let us work with ICE. Let's cooperate with them. Let's see if we can't de-escalate this. But Attorney General, you did the exact opposite. And 2 people are dead because you encouraged them to put themselves into harm's way. And now you're exploiting those 2 martyrs. That was a tragedy. It never should have happened. Now, we can investigate, but I can't imagine being a law enforcement official where I know my colleagues have been shot at, their vehicles rammed, that their trained activists deployed. And by the way, we know at least one of those activists had a semi-automatic pistol with extra clips. So now you're an ICE officer. You're doing enforcement action. You've got a team behind you trying to protect you. You've got all these trained activists behind you. Is it any wonder they're at hair trigger alert? A tragedy was going to happen, and you encouraged it. And you ought to feel damn guilty about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, sit there and smirk. Smirk. It's sick. It is despicable.
Are you asking me for comment, Senator? Because everything you said was untrue. It was a nice theatrical performance, but it was all lies.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're here today because Americans are outraged by the deliberate intimidation, trampling of civil rights, and lawlessness from this administration that has left 2 Americans shot dead, 2 American citizens shot dead by masked federal agents. And with respect to my colleague from Wisconsin, there is a long tradition in this country, especially in the civil rights movement, which finally brought us out of the Jim Crow era, of peaceful, nonviolent demonstration where people are trained so that when they are attacked, even by law enforcement who are escalating, they know how to stay calm. And it is because of that kind of nonviolent First Amendment activity that we were finally able to pass civil rights laws in this country. Immigration enforcement needs to combine strong border security with a targeted, focused effort on removing violent criminals. Instead, this administration's divisive, dangerous, and deadly actions are making our communities less safe. Today's hearing provides an important opportunity for us to hear from those on the ground and those in charge, because what is happening today is unacceptable to the people in my state of New Hampshire and to people from every corner, and in fact, people around the globe. Since I just got back from the country of Greenland, they know this too, and their children are scared of the United States of America. I hope that my Republican colleagues will continue the bipartisan conversations that some of us have been trying to have and are necessary to enact meaningful, common sense reforms to keep our communities safe. Now, to Mr. Schnell, last month, President Trump stated that Minnesota officials should turn over all criminal illegal aliens that are currently incarcerated in their state prisons and jails to federal authorities. As the head of the Department of Corrections, you run Minnesota's prisons, and in your testimony, you described how your department already works with ICE to transfer non-citizen prisoners in your custody to federal custody. You all do that. So you're doing your part, and you are working within the law to coordinate with ICE. I'd just like to hear from you, given your years of experience in law enforcement. Have the actions of ICE and the Trump administration improved effective law enforcement and cooperation in Minnesota, or have they made it more difficult?
Senator, the current operation makes it much more difficult. And I think, you know, the levels of misinformation do become challenging. In fact, just in the past few days, in the White House X account, there was a post about the ICE's removal of the worst from Minnesota streets. And they cited Mr. Abdi Rashid Alim, his arrest and removal from Minnesota, when in fact, Mr. Alim was released directly to ICE on May 1st of 2025 from the Department of Corrections. And so this misinformation, I think, makes it much more challenging for law enforcement. And I think it's so contrary to the way it has historically been in terms of collaboration. And, you know, this is one of the challenges I think we face.
Thank you. You also talked in your testimony about trust, saying, quote, "The erosion of trust between DHS and Minnesota is at the core of this crisis, and I suspect we will feel its repercussions for years to come." This is an incredibly important point. The greatest responsibility a government has is keeping its citizens safe. But that can't come at the cost of freedom and liberty. These things all have to work together, or you lose the trust of your citizens. And all across our country, and in my state of New Hampshire, law enforcement and communities work together in this way to work to be safe. So having lived this experience, what do you see as some of the repercussions of this loss of trust, and what can we do to rebuild it?
Senator, I think it happens here with this, and we'll start with this committee and with Congress taking, you know, some clear action to address and rebuild the legitimacy and trust in ICE. And there, we want to be clear, there is a legitimate need for immigration enforcement and for addressing those people who represent, in particular, a threat to public safety. But I think what we want is to return to the days where there is close collaboration, as you described, where we can focus on key issues of community and public safety across our country, things like transnational large-scale drug efforts, as well as human trafficking. These are really important issues that there has been longstanding collaboration, and I worry that because of what's happening today, those efforts will be lost, or we will not invest the kinds of resources that are needed in those areas.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess one last question. I come from a small state, but we have 234 cities and towns. And some of our police departments are a few officers. Our larger cities have, you know, many more than that. But can you talk about the realistic need to cooperate and plan when you have limited resources? It sounds to me that some of what the administration is asking the state of Minnesota or the community of Minneapolis to do is turn over its entire police force to ICE to do their work and then drawing them away from investigating state crimes, which is, of course, incredibly important. Can you just talk about that for a second?
Senator, Minneapolis, like many communities across the country, have limited resources and have profound need on the policing front. And so it has to be targeted and focused on the needs of those communities and diverting this away. In fact, we can go back and look at the president's task force on 21st century policing from 2015, just 11 years ago, that really focused on the need for there to be an effort, but the decoupling of immigration enforcement from local law enforcement. And that doesn't mean that there isn't collaboration, and we need to focus on the right kinds of targets, but it does speak to the fact that local law enforcement has a role, as does federal immigration efforts. And I think recognizing the differences there does become critically important. And, law enforcement agencies across the state want to work together, need to work together, but there also has to be appropriate focus on the needs of a particular community, large or small.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Langford.
Chair Paul, thank you. Thank you all for coming here in the conversation today. I do want to bring a couple of things here. One is news for those of y'all that are here on the panel you probably have not seen yet. That Tom Homan has announced that they are standing down Operation Metro Surge in a press conference during this time period. He also announced that they have had 4,000 total arrests of folks that are undocumented in Operation Metro Surge, and have identified over 3,300 children that were unaccompanied minors that we didn't know their whereabouts. They were lost during the last administration, that those kids were also identified as far as where they are. We have some kids that have been lost into labor trafficking and all kinds of things on it. They've done that. So there is some news that's happening. I also want to be able to correct the record on a couple of things I've heard just even in conversation today. This number of 14% of the folks have a criminal record that ICE has detained is actually not an accurate number. That number is 14% of violent criminals. That's murders and rapes. 70% of the folks that are arrested nationwide have a criminal record. And so it's interesting that I guess there's some folks that don't see as important to arresting folks with 5 DUIs or that are drug dealers or robbery. They're just interested in getting murderers and rapists out. But I would say for most people in my state, if they have a criminal record, they're interested in those folks being removed from the country. So 70% of the folks have been arrested